Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Verstraete. Oh, and please feel free to come in. There are still plenty of seats over here. And we are here to join Larry Verstraete as he celebrates the launch of his brand new book, Coop for Keeps. Now, Coop for Keeps is, of course, the follow-up to the much beloved Coop the Great. This afternoon, we have many special guests, so this event will feature a discussion with Larry himself, our host for the afternoon, MaryLou Driedger, Darrel Hominuk, Director of Adoption with the Winnipeg Humane Society, and Lucy Sloan, the Director and Founder of Lil Steps Wellness, an agency that offers animal-assisted counseling and therapy, among other services. And of course, it would be remiss if I did not mention our very special guest, Barney, the therapy dog, sitting in our front row. We're so incredibly grateful to Yellow Dog, which is an imprint of Great Plains Press, for publishing this book and for supporting this event. Now, just a few quick procedural notes before we get started. Following my blathering, there will of course be an appearance from Larry behind this podium, and he'll tell you a little bit about this new book. Following that, there will be a series of conversations at these stools to my left, hosted by our inimitable host, MaryLou Driedger. And after that, there will be the opportunity for you all to ask questions. Now, I would encourage you to allow those questions to percolate during the conversation so you're ready to go when we get started. And when we do actually get to the Q&A, I'll run around with this handheld microphone, which is not a comment on your ability to project your voice. It just ensures that all those watching at home can also hear your questions. And if you are one of those people watching at home, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat, and we will put them to our guests as time permits. I'll be back at the end of the event to review signing procedure, but for right now, the only thing I will put in your brain is the fact that we will need to safely transport Larry to a table just beside our cash desk for the signing. So we'll ask you all just to remain in place for one moment, and then I will summon you over when he is ready to go. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing both our host for the afternoon and our very special guest, Larry. So MaryLou Driedger's curiosity and love of learning have taken her to some 50 destinations across the globe. Heritage House published her middle grade adventure story, Lost on the Prairie, in 2021. It was nominated for both a Manitoba Book Award and a Manitoba Young Reader's Choice Award. Her second middle grade novel, 60s Girl, also from Heritage House, was released in 2023. Now, some of you may be familiar with our very special guest this afternoon, Larry Verstraete. Larry is, of course, an award-winning Winnipeg author of 18 books of fiction and nonfiction for kids and teens. A former middle years teacher with a penchant for storytelling, his books have been on recommended reading lists and have received numerous honors. It's always such a thrill to welcome him back behind a podium to celebrate his new book, so please join me in giving an enormously warm round of applause to Larry Verstraete.
Well, sorry, I don't have John's voice, you may notice, but this is so mellow. You just kind of ease in and feel like you're going on a journey. Anyways, I want to thank you very much, John, for that and for helping us organize this event. I also want to thank McNally Robinson Booksellers, who have been supporting readers and writers for a long time now, since 1981. And when I reflect on it, I realized that in 1981, that's when I published my first book. And I do remember a signing event, but it wasn't at this particular location. It was at the Keniston Village Mall, where they had their original store, which was much smaller and a little less elegant than this one, but just as comfortable and welcoming. So yeah, my association with McNally Robinson goes back a long, long way. I want to thank all of you who are here today and those who are currently streaming on YouTube. And I see, when I look at the crowd, all kinds of connections from old teaching colleagues from years back. students from years back, lots of family and friends who have come to support me, and a special delegation from Grosvenor School, where I've had the pleasure of working with the grade 3 class a little bit over the year. And I see there's a few of them in the crowd too. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming. I also want to thank Great Plains Press for seeing promise in another Coop book, and for being so encouraging and supporting through the whole process, and so helpful in planning this launch too. So a special mention to the team, that's Mel Martinet, Katerina DeBacher, Keith Kidje, and my editor for both Coop books, Stephanie Barrington. I also want to thank the partners who are here with helping with launch, MaryLou, who you've had some introduction to, Darrel from the Winnipeg Humane Society, Eva and her dog Barney, and Lucy Sloan, who's the director and founder of Lil Steps Wellness. Side note, many years ago, when I was teaching Dalhousie School, grade 6, Lucy was in my class. And her sister, Cynthia, was in my class at one point too. So yeah, we're going back a ways there. But you know, you could see the promise in Lucy even back then. She was an outstanding student, and no surprise that she's doing what she's doing now. And we'll all learn a little bit more about her later on. It might seem that writers work in isolation, and to a large degree, that's absolutely true. But we're often backed by teams of supporters, and in my case, I've had a lot of supporters over the years. I'd like to give a shout out to my current writers group. They call themselves the Anitas, and there's a good reason for that, and you can search them out later on to find out what that exactly means. We've met every second Thursday for years now, first here at McNally Robinson to do our writing and sharing, and now, since the pandemic changed rules a little bit, we Zoom, which is really good for people like me who travel and are away, because I can just tap in and join the group from wherever I happen to be. So I'd like to acknowledge them because they were instrumental in writing this book and even helped me narrow down the title. So thank you to Jody Carmichael, MaryLou Driedger, Deborah Fraze, Gabrielle Goldstone, Christina Jantz, Mel Matheson, Candace Serene, and Pat Trottier. I really enjoy working with all of them, and I've learned a lot from the group. I've also got a team of home supporters. So my children, and you know, it seems awkward to even call them that now because they're adults, but to me, they're always going to be my children. So it's Stephen and Christy, who live in Bellevue, Washington, and I think might be actually watching now, and Ashley and Kane, who are here today. I also want to thank my grandchildren because I dedicated the book to them, because over the years, whenever I've been struggling with the book, one or the other of them would say, "You've got to write that book. There are people waiting for it." So they cheered me on. So thank you, Reagan and Bellevue, Abby, Jack, and Kai, who are here today. I don't think the book would have been quite what it was without your support. And last, certainly not least, is Jo, my wife, my partner for 50 years this year. She keeps me plugging away, gives me space and time to do that, and she's my sounding board when I hit rough patches, and I don't think I would have been quite as far into the whole thing without you, so thank you, Jo. I'd like to give a little bit of a reading to Coop for peeps, so I'm going to read from chapter 1 and a bit of chapter 2. On the day the crows first showed up, my humans weren't home. Zach and Emma were attending schools in Madison, a small city 6 kilometers away. Jess, their mother, was running errands. Other than Emma's cat, Lucinda, who was hiding somewhere in the house, I was alone, resting in the shade of the tall Douglas fir tree at the back of the 2-story house with the wraparound porch. For early September, it was warm. Not a single breeze rustled the branches. Not a whisper of traffic whipped down the road to Madison. If it hadn't been for the crows who settled in the tree, cawing like they had something important to say, I might still be sleeping there. I counted 5 crows, 5 well-fed, annoying crows. What brought them to the Douglas fir, I couldn't say. Maybe they saw a future home for themselves. Maybe they were simply looking for cool shade on such a warm day. Whatever the reason, the crows took over the tree as if they had every right to be there. One crow, larger and bossier than the others, seemed to be the leader. He was almost my size, inky black with a slightly hunched back. While the rest landed on the upper branches, the large crow settled lower down. He studied me. I studied him back. I was impressed by his razor-sharp claws, oily feathers, powerful wings, and incredibly sharp beak. A chill swept through me. It dawned on me that perhaps I should be afraid of the bird. How long would it take him to drill a hole in my skull with his beak? Seconds? And what would I do about it if he tried? Dachshunds are compact dogs, long in the body, short in the legs. Although we're great at digging and wriggling into tight spaces, we aren't great at running for our lives. Just then, the smallest of the crows flew down and snuggled beside the larger one. They looked like an odd but friendly pair, and not the least bit interested in drilling holes in my head. Gradually, I relaxed. I fell asleep for a minute, maybe two. Loud, frenzied caws jerked me awake. The large crow swooped over me, flying so low that I couldn't dab a few feathers. The small crow followed him, then the others, all of them squawking the same screechy song. Above their cries, I heard other sounds. The clink-clank of a chain, the thump of tires rumbling over the ruts, and a panicky voice yelled out, "I'm screwed, I'm totally screwed." I knew the voice. I should help Zach, shouldn't I? But what good would it do? I was just an old dog and hardly the world's healthiest specimen. I caught sight of the large wire mesh globe standing in the garden. I saw the 5 metal statues inside, the man and woman with their arms wrapped around each other, the boy and girl standing in front of them, and a 5th figure, a dog who looked like me, the only difference being that he had a glittering star dangling above his head, and I definitely didn't. What would that dog do, I wondered. Of course, I already knew. Running as fast as I could, I tore through the doggy flap Jess had installed for me in the back door. I yapped down the long hall with its small rooms on either side. When I entered the living room, I slowed. I was already winded. My legs were stiff and sore. My arthritis was especially bad. Why rush? I told myself. There's nothing you can do anyway. But when Zach's screams and the crow's caws grew louder, I picked up the pace. I steered around a large sofa and 2 recliners, past the grandfather clock in the hall, and a staircase leading to the bedrooms above. When I reached the front entrance, I peered out the tall open window that bordered the heavy wooden door. The 5 crows were perched along the hydro wire that ran from the road. The largest one seemed to be in command, cawing orders, flapping his wings like he was lining up the others. When a figure rolled into the driveway on a rusty bicycle, the crow squawked and bobbed his head and had the others do the same. Zach's face was flushed. He was huffing. Even from afar, I could see the wild look in his eyes. I yapped louder, "Run, Zach, run." When Zach neared the house, he threw the bike to the ground. He glanced behind, ran up the porch steps, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. Quickly, he slammed the door and locked it again. "Shush, Coop." He tossed his backpack to the floor. "If we're quiet, maybe they'll just go away." Zach's black hair looked like it had been stirred in a blender. The white t-shirt he wore that said, "Me, sarcastic, never," was dripping with sweat. The collar was torn. Sickly green stains covered the knees of his jeans. I picked up the heavy scent of chain oil along with something else. Freshly cut grass, perhaps, or maybe decaying leaves. And again, it could have been fear or panic I detected. They have scents of their own, too. Zach pressed his back against the door and craned his neck to glance at the window as 2 hulking boys rolled into the yard on bikes of their own. Immediately, the crows hopped along the hydro wire, screeching and bobbing their heads. The taller of the boys looked older than Zach, huskier too, with chest muscles that rippled through a t-shirt too tight for him. His neck was as thick as his square head. That was topped with a mop of greasy blonde hair. "Shut up, you dumb birds," yelled the shorter boy. He was a sturdy-looking kid about Zach's age, Smaller than the first, but with the same thick neck, square head, blonde hair, and muscular build. Both boys flung down their bikes and stood over Zach's, their hands balled into fists. "That his?" the older boy asked. "Piece of junk, isn't it, Dylan?" said the shorter one. Dylan scanned the yard. "No cars, doesn't look like anyone else's home. What do you think, Donnie?" Donnie smiled. "He's all alone. It's perfect." The crow shuffled along the wire. The leader flapped his wings and squawked. The others joined in screaming just as loud. Donnie's face grew tomato red. He shook his fist at the birds. "I said shut up," he yelled. "Forget the crows, little brother. That's not why we're here." Dylan rested his hand on Donnie's shoulder. "You sure about this?" A hurt look crossed Donnie's face. "You gotta make him pay for what he did, Dylan." "Okay," Dylan said. "I said I would, and a promise is a promise." And that's where we'll stop for this.
So I was so delighted when Larry asked me if I would lead the interview part of his launch. Larry has been a terrific mentor to me. He and I have belonged to writing groups for children's authors together for over a decade now, and he's truly been an inspiration with his prolific publication record, his enthusiastic encouragement of other writers, and some great practical advice when I was signing the contract for my first novel. Now, I have to be honest and admit that I had a couple of pretty scary experiences with dogs when I was a child. And so I always tell Larry that his writing had to be really wonderful to have me overcome my fears and fall totally in love with Coop the Great, which I did. So I was really happy to learn, as I'm sure all of you were, that Larry was publishing a sequel. And that's kind of leads me to the first question I have for Larry. I know from my own experience that writing a sequel can be kind of tricky in some ways. The new story has to stand on its own, but it also has to dovetail and connect with all the events and the characters in the previous book. And so I'm wondering if that was challenging for you at all, Larry, as you were putting the book together and figuring out the plot, because Coop was a sequel.
Well, I really hadn't planned on writing a second book, but I think after I finished Coop the Great, I thought, well, this is over, that was fun, let's move on. But somehow that dog seemed to linger and the character kind of stuck with me, and I just felt there was probably more to the story, and I felt I left off at a pretty good place in Coop the Great, but I really wanted to know what happened to him afterwards. So the second book, Coop for Keeps, picks up like 3 months later. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge because I also wanted it to be a standalone novel, meaning that, kids, whoever was reading it, could just read that book and not have to read Coop the Great to begin with. So picking and choosing what information was going to go in was a little bit tricky. So first of all, there was the consistency. I couldn't invent anything from the past that hadn't already been described too much. And I had to pick up whatever happened there and make sure I integrated it into the new book. But at the same time, I didn't want to repeat the story of what happened in Coop the Great. So there are certain things that come up in the second book that I just give enough information to, but not sort of dwell on. And if anybody wants to know more, well, they could always read the other book. So as an example, like Zach, one of the main characters here, is his parents are divorced. His father's out of the picture. He really, really misses his father. So that's explained, that's in the book, that comes out that they're not together and that he's missing his father, but it doesn't explain why they're not together. But that's covered in the first book. So, you could read the books in either order, and that's kind of what I was intending. But the challenge was not to reveal too much, just enough, and make sure that everything kind of threaded together.
Oh, I think you did a great job. You've written dozens of books, and most of the past books you wrote were sort of information style books. This is your third novel, but most of them were the kind of writing that definitely required you to do a whole bunch of research. But I'm wondering, what were the things you had to research to write Coop for Keeps?
Well, you know what, I've been hearing people pronounce dachshunds and dachshunds. And at first it didn't, I just figured, well, I knew the right answer. I called it dachshunds. But then I realized, well, maybe I'm not so correct. So one of the things I did check was, what is the pronunciation? And it turns out both of them are okay. But dachshunds actually has its roots in the origins of the dog itself, because it comes from a German words. And dachs, and I might be not pronouncing it right, but dachs means badger, I believe, and hund means hound. And that's exactly what, dachshunds, why they're so popular in Germany, is that they were actually kind of a hunting dog, and they would root out badgers from their dens, and they had these, massive claws that could just scoop dirt and all the rest of that. So that's one of the research elements. And because I was including crows, I wanted to sort of check in on them. It turns out they're really quite fascinating, and there are all kinds of research studies being done on them. One of the things that they noticed is that they're great problem solvers. And one of the things that they filmed was actually a crow figuring out how to make water rise in a glass or a cylinder, and it was picking up rocks and putting them in there so that whatever was in the tube would rise to the top. So that's intelligence, I guess. And they have, social habits that I wasn't aware of. Some people claim that they actually hold funerals when one of their own dies. And, they gather and they seem to spread the news of something tragic happened to this crow, and they all want to learn about it so they can avoid it happening to them too. At least that's the human interpretation.
I just found that part very fascinating. Kind of had to look up to, do crows really do that?
And I tried to incorporate some of that into the book. And I guess the other element of it deals a lot with bullying. I mean, that is one of the themes, and you met some of the bullies in the little bit that I read to you. So I did really want to understand more about that, and sort of what facilitates it, and how the bully victim thing might play out.
I was actually kind of curious about that, Larry, of that topic of bullying stemmed from the fact that you were maybe bullied as a child, or you saw that when you were a teacher, or where did that come from?
I guess the definition I'm going with bullying was, it's basically people or groups of people with more power who inflict harm on people consistently, like repeatedly, on people with less power, something like that. So I think if we all think of examples, we probably all have at some point or other been bullied, not just as kids, but as adults, perhaps in the workplace or whatever it is. So, and typically boys, going to the main characters in the story, are like 14 and so on. For boys, it's often a physical kind of thing, and for girls, it's more of a social thing. So that was good to know too.
Another thing I was, I just thought you captured the voice of the Coop so well, the voice of a dog so well. So I wondered if you had a dog for a pet when you were a child, Larry, or if your children had dogs for pets when they were growing up. How did you learn so much about dogs?
How we hang out with dogs. Well, as growing up, we didn't have dogs in our family. We had every other creature you can imagine, probably, but not dogs. But then as an adult, we've had dogs in our family, and our children have dogs as well. So the association is always there. And one thing I recognized early on is that dogs have different personalities and characteristics, and they seem to be equipped with them. So one example is we had a dog named Barney. Some of you will probably know Barney. And he was just a character. Like, he was notorious for doing all kinds of damage and knocking down plants and chewing up linoleum and pulling down curtains and eating, I think, Joe's new coat that she had purchased with a badger collar or something or other. I love that thing. And he was just, but he was kind of impish, but on the other hand, he was just a friendly dog. I love that dog. And then we also have a dog like Haley and Lila in Seattle, who are just one of the more gentle types. You know, when Haley comes and looks at me with those big brown eyes, I think she's reading my mind, and right away we're connecting over, it seems like, over eyes. So I think some of that came into the story.
You've had lots of experience with dogs, right? So now we want to move to Darrel, and you know, I have to admit, Darrel, I've never visited the Winnipeg Humane Society, but I did read a couple of months ago that you hosted a puppy party that more than 300 people showed up for. And I have to say that got me really curious about the Humane Society. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Humane Society and what services you provide? And specifically, what does your job as a director of adoptions entail? Maybe besides throwing parties.
Thank you. Many people may not know, but the Winnipeg Humane Society was founded in 1894, so it's one of the Manitoba's oldest shelters and welfare organizations in this province. We are committed to protecting animals from suffering and to promoting their welfare and dignity. As a nonprofit registered charity, we're funded primarily by donations and by events, much like the puppy party. Excuse me. Our shelter is also one of the most successful and proactive adoption centers in Canada. Each year we find homes for over 4,200 animals, and we also reunite more than 700 animals with their owners. So there's a lot of work to be done in the organization. So we provide a multitude of services, and far too many for me to list in this allotted period of time. So I'll just quickly list them off. But we offer adoption services. We offer we have animal behavioral experts on board. We have a volunteer and foster department. We have intake, and intake is a very interesting unit because they're responsible for all the incoming animals. They more or less orchestrate where all the animals are to go. So they're assessing behavior, they're assessing health, whether or not it goes to our veterinary clinic for maybe examination and surgery, or whether it goes to adoption, or whether it goes to fostering, because maybe the animals experience things like fear, anxiety, and stress, otherwise known as FAS. I know it parallels another human disorder, but this is the one we are specific to animals. We also, as I mentioned, we have our clinic veterinarians and our investigations and emergency response team. A very tough department to be working in because these are the people that are trying to prevent cruelty to animals. So they're working with backyard breeders, they're working with puppy mills and trying to take control of a situation that can be really undesirable for a lot of animals. So before I tell you what I do, I'd like to maybe just open up by saying I'm new to the Winnipeg Humane Society. I've got about 40 years in the social sciences. I have moved from counseling the two-legged variety to the four-legged variety. So I'm on a sharp learning curve with this organization. But I've had pets my entire lifetime, right up to childhood. And the last quarter of a century, I have been very partial to Siberian Huskies. And for those that know, that this can be a very challenging breed to raise and to manage, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. So as the director of adoptions, I'm responsible for leading the adoptions team and overseeing the adoption processes of all adoptions in our shelter. My focus is to maximize the number of forever homes for our animals. So our team plays a really crucial role in connecting homeless animals with loving homes. So for instance, our team adopted out 4,213 animals last year. So I feel fortunate to be working alongside such a passionate and dedicated group of people at the Winnipeg Humane Society.
Thank you. Now, I'm sure you read Coop for Keeps.
I have not, and I confess I have not yet.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Coop, the hero of Larry's book. He's an older dachshund, and he's been adopted many times, but without success. The adoptions have either failed, or he's been abandoned, or he returns to the shelter on his own, or he just runs away. So I'm wondering if you can tell us why some pet adoptions work, and in Coop's case, they often didn't. And if we'd be interested in adopting a pet, what kinds of things should we be thinking about before we do that?
Well, I think Coop's experience is unfortunately not an isolated incident. And we're seeing a lot of amazing dogs coming back to our shelter for readoption. Why does this happen? I think perhaps the most significant factor that can influence the outcome of an adoption is a person's preset expectations, preconceived notions, if you will. I think deep in our subconscious, we have a particular way of looking at a given situation, and it's not necessarily factual. And this is something we experience at the shelter with some regularity. I wouldn't say it's frequent, but it's often enough. So I think when you look at it, each adopter's past experiences, expectations, and tolerance levels can shape their perception of what the animal's behavior and personality should look like rather than what it is. And I think that can pose a bit of a challenge. So if the animal's behavior or personality doesn't align with their expectations, some adopters may struggle to adjust. And as a result, this leads to the animal being returned to the shelter for readoption. Another key factor that usually leads to an adoption return is behavior. So animal behavior can be complicated and full of challenges, much like people. Even when adopters are fully informed of what to expect by our trained adoption counselors, they can still feel overwhelmed when the challenges are more than what they expected. And when this happens, they don't feel necessarily equipped to manage some of these challenges that the animal may be exhibiting. So what happens? Well, if they're not equipped, you look at resources, you look at lifestyle, safety, or family reasons. All of these can contribute to an animal's return for readoption. So before adopting an animal, our adoption counselors will go thoroughly through a checklist that we've created. And what it helps the adopter is to make the best possible informed decision. So we ask them a number of questions, and I'll just go through these very quickly. But we ask, can they consider their lifestyle and the characteristics that they're looking for in their pet? We ask that they review their living situation to make sure that it is in fact suitable for this animal. We also ask that they consult with their family, particularly if they've got children at home or if they've got their mother or father living with them. We want to make sure that everybody is on board with this new adoption. We ask that they be prepared to invest in their pet. Veterinarian care, equipment, food, etc. can be very expensive, and particularly as we're looking at an inflationary time, we're finding a lot of people are really struggling trying to meet these costs. I wish I can give you an average cost, but it varies from animal to family. We also ask that they consider their knowledge and experience, again, talking about the preconceived notions that a person may have of how an animal should behave versus how an animal behaves. And we ask that they assess the pet's personality and demands, understand their needs, and understand their temperament. And find a reputable shelter organization that can help with the adoption procedure.
Now, is Barney ready to be introduced? Okay, great. We have, and I think Barney's been kind of around meeting a lot of people already, right? But Darrel, I'm going to ask you to just do a little introduction here too, and tell us about Barney and sort of a part of the animal therapy side of the Humane Society.
I can do that. So Barney is a snoodle, and for those that may not know, he's a cross between a Schnauzer and a poodle, and has been Eva's companion for about 9 years now.
Yes.
So after the first 2 years, Eva noticed something really interesting and fun about Barney, that he loved to play fetch and had an interesting quirk. He would always howl on the third ring of her telephone. And this went on for quite a while, from what I remember. She also noticed a unique characteristic that Barney had, and that he was friendly toward everyone, as she said, not a mean bone in his body. So when he was about 2 years old, one of Eva's acquaintances suggested she take Barney to St. John's Ambulance for an assessment to determine if he could become a therapy dog. So Eva was intrigued. She arranged for an appointment where Barney would undergo an assessment, and in a short period of time, he was confirmed that he could play a crucial role in the benefit of helping people. Thus began Barney's journey in his new occupation as a therapy dog. Over the last 7 years, Eva and Barney have been to various functions with the St. John's Ambulance and the Winnipeg Humane Society. They also regularly visit long-term care centers where Barney is well known by the staff and residents. The residents are usually quite excited when Barney comes to visit them, exclaiming, "Barney's here, Barney's here." Eva always takes notice of how relaxed residents feel, often smiling and chatting with Barney. So as a therapy dog, Barney plays a major role in improving the psychological and emotional well-being of people, and has been in demand now for the last 7 years, if I remember correctly. So he forms part of an exclusive team at the Winnipeg Humane Society, otherwise known as the Certified Therapy Dog Program. Therapy dogs are trained to bring comfort and joy to individuals of all ages and diverse needs. Our devoted therapy dogs are here to make a positive impact on the physical, mental, and behavioral well-being of people. This is done by fostering meaningful connections through the incredible bond between humans and animals. And I heard that referenced earlier by Larry. Our program extends its reach to a variety of settings, including schools, senior homes, correctional centers, rehabilitation facilities, hospitals, workplaces, to mention only a few. We'll also tailor the program to accommodate people of all ages, including children with various physical and developmental or emotional needs. Therapy dogs are carefully selected and offer a heartwarming experience that goes beyond the ordinary. I just want to close by saying how pleased I am to be here and being part of this very special event.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to Lucy now. I looked at your website for your Lil Steps Wellness, and I saw all these trained professionals that are part of your organization, and I was really impressed. And I wonder if you could tell us just a little bit about Lil Steps Wellness and how it got started and what kind of work you do.
For sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. So I've been running Lil Steps Wellness for about 9 years now. The origins is interesting with Lil Steps Wellness. I could go back to childhood and being an animal lover and loving to help people, but it was about almost actually over 10 years ago now, I had experienced a pretty serious head injury and wasn't able to work for a couple of years. I'd been in the helping field for about 25. I've been working as a counselor for about 25 years. And in that journey of my own recovery, I ended up purchasing 2 miniature horses named Peanut and Sweetie. And in that, it was really interesting because I started to notice that just being around the horses with all the symptoms that were going on with my head injury, I had a lot of symptoms around anxiety and just lots of different things going on. Just being around the animals was therapeutic. So I realized, I'm like, why not marry together my counseling background and integrate animals into the work I do? So that was the starting of it. I ended up getting too many miniature horses because they're so small and cute. And I have now about 40 to 50 animals on my farm, not miniature horses, but lots of different animals. And we have 2 farm locations in Cooks Creek and St. Malo, and then we also now just expanded to a Winnipeg location as well. We have about 16, almost actually 18 therapists that work with Lil Steps Wellness, and we do a bunch of different modalities of therapy services for children, teens, adults. But one of the ones that we do that's very different in Manitoba is animal-assisted therapy. So it's where we integrate the animals into our practice, and the animals get to work. I call all of my animals are my coworkers, including my little rat named Pearl.
Well, I did look at all of the animals on your website, and you've got a goat named Penelope and a pot-bellied pig named Winnie, and there's even a dog called Cooper.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how you choose the animals, and also how do you match the right animal with the right person?
That's a good question. So actually, it's interesting because it's almost the opposite way around. The animals probably choose us, which is really interesting.
Oh.
So I would say probably majority, other than the dogs that work in our practice in Winnipeg, we have like kind of chosen temperaments and things like that that will work well in those types of settings because they do go into schools and do different programs. But most of the animals at Lil Steps Wellness are actually rescued animals. So they have a whole variety of different stories to them. And this is actually what integrated really neatly with the book is that with Coop in the book, he comes from lots of different background experiences, and so do the animals on my farm as well. They come from a number of different experiences and different quirks and things like that. So it's just being aware of those pieces, and then we match them sometimes to the person. But a lot of times, how I've explained it to people, when kids or teens or adults come to the farm, it's kind of magic. It's interesting because you'll have just a child walk onto the farm and the animal will come to them, and it seems to be that perfect match of animal. animal that either shares the story of that child or that helps in the process of working with the child. It's a really interesting process to see.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I encourage you to go on the website, and there are pictures of all the animals and a little description about what they're like and where they came from and what their personalities are like. And it's really fascinating. I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit yet to Lucy. We've talked about it a bit, but what is it, in Coop for Keeps, it's the crows that seem to be able to build a bond with Zach, who's a really frustrated and upset young man. What is it about that bond with animals and people that's special, that can really make a difference?
It's interesting. I don't know, probably a lot of you have animals out here, right? And you can just even think about when you're with your animal, what does it make you feel like? It makes you feel that connection, right? And one of the interesting pieces with animals is that, and people, is that we have a natural need for connection. That's one of our basic needs, right? And what I think is interesting with Zach in the book, he comes from a history where he struggles with expressing himself. He doesn't let anybody in. He's very angry, and he has a whole history of a lot of things that have happened. So I find what is so fascinating with that is that he kind of builds this wall, but the crows, they give him a little gift, and they kind of protect him, and they do all these things for him that make him feel accepted. And it gives him that sense of connection. And the other thing is, with animals, the most important thing is that they don't judge us, right? They accept us kind of for who we are without judgment, and they provide that safe space for us. So I think with those pieces in there, I think that's why Zach really connected with the crows. Yeah.
Thanks. So Mary, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions for you. It struck me as I read your book that you were asking some pretty big, serious questions in Coop for Keeps. Why do people bully? Why do people kill for fun? Why do people die? And I wondered if at any time you thought maybe those questions are too big and scary for kids to think about. Are they up to that? So.
Well, the book is intended for grades 3 probably and up. And I think, first of all, it's Coop that's telling the story. So we're seeing everything through this dog's eyes. And quite frankly, he's confused about humans. He can't quite figure them out and why they're doing this. And sometimes it seems like they're doing contrary things to what they were doing the day before. So he's the observer, and he's also telling the story. And I think the fact that it's the dog telling the story, kids relate to that because they're probably at that same stage themselves. They're asking the big questions. Often they won't express it to us, but they're asking, well, why is that person a bully? How did that happen? And why are other people maybe the victims? Or, just this happens to them. The questions about why do people die? I think that's probably a valid question kids ask early on in. So the fact that it's the dog dealing with it, I think kind of kids can relate to that. That's kind of where they're at too. And I think if we don't ask the big questions, or if they don't see it in a book, then probably they don't think they should be asking those questions. We're alone with those questions is what they might be thinking. So I think part of what literature does is it exposes them to that. They can see a reflection of themselves in the story, and it's kind of a safe place to maybe ask those questions. And I know that there are maybe teachers and parents are reading the book with their kids or to their kids. And I think those are opportune times to maybe stop and say, well, maybe we should have a talk about this. And it gives that option to explore a little bit deeper.
That sounds perfect. So I think one final question before we turn it over to John and see if there's any questions out there. I guess there will be people that will want me to ask if you think there'll be another book in the Coop series, and if are you working on a book like that now, or what ready project are you working on?
I am working on something different. I actually, after Coop the Great, I started something. I wrote another novel, and I just kind of shelved it because I wasn't really happy with it. So I've gone back to that. I think I see a way out through the writing. As far as the third book goes, well, that I guess remains to be seen what happens with book number 2. I do have a little bit of a story in mind.
Okay.
I've got grandchildren that keep asking about it, so that's encouraging. So
Well,
who's to say?
to the grandchildren, keep asking questions, okay? So maybe your grandpa will write us another great book.
Questions like, what's taking so long?
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to John now so he can facilitate some of you asking questions.
Thank you so much, MaryLou. So as we mentioned at the beginning, if there is anybody here locally who has a question, please feel free to put up your hand and I'll wander over to you, just to ensure that everyone watching at home can hear. And if you are one of those people watching at home, including the Seattle fan team who have confirmed that they are viewing, please feel free to write your question in the chat. Were there any here? Yes.
What was Coop's very first owner like?
Well, he's lived a long life and I really don't know all of his previous owners. I do know that the one that came before Mike was the one that ended was in the first book, was really his first true companion. Coop actually distinguishes between different levels of humans. He calls some owners who like to possess things, and certain dogs as well. And then there's masters who like to rule things. But his very favorite is a companion. And that's what Mike was to him and what he hopes he's going to find as well in this book.
And any other questions here? Oh, yes.
Do you think that you can maybe do a prequel?
No pressure. Well, maybe someday. Maybe you and I should have a chat and maybe give you some ideas. Great.
And we do have a question online from said fan team, and they're asking which dogs that you've met have influenced Coop's personality the most and how?
Well, I would think that Barney is right up there because he was just a character of a dog, and some of the things that Coop does in the book, like Coop is a crotch sniffer. Well, Barney definitely was too. So some of those things are Barney, and then the whole thing about being sort of at peace with certain humans, I think comes from the more sedate dogs like Haley and Lila. I haven't found a way of integrating Molly, my daughter and son-in-law's dog. He's quite a character too, but on the other side of the fence from the others, it seems so.
No
Someday we'll write a book just about Molly.
And we have some questions over here as well. So there was one here first.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much. I know there's a number of young storytellers here from Grosvenor in particular. What would you say to young storytellers as a form of encouragement or in terms of the wisdom of your experience?
Well, I think the only thing I can really recommend is if you want to write, read a lot. Read all kinds of things, and over time, I think some of what you read gets integrated into your brain. You recognize patterns, you know things about stories, and that just makes your writing that much easier. And I don't think you can write if you don't actually apply pen to paper or use a computer or whatever means you want, but somewhere along the line, you actually have to put words on a page. And I think that's the other part of it. So writing anything, even if it's just a couple of lines a day, is a good start.
Did this book take longer than the other book?
Yes. And I think Coop the Great came out in 2018, so that's a few years ago now. But like I said, I've been writing other things in between too, at least that's what I'm gonna go with here. It's not that I haven't been writing, I write every day in one way or another, but not always as productively. People who write probably know there's some days it just seems to work and other days where you wonder why you're doing it. And I guess that's happened to me too. So it's taken a bit longer than I thought.
Was Coop the only name Coop ever had?
Was Coop the only Coop? Only, so, what was the question?
Oh, was Coop only ever called Coop, or did he have other names before that?
Actually, he went through quite a round of different names, and Rusty was one that I really liked at one point, and then I keep changing them and changing them. It just didn't seem to have the right sound to it. And I think it was only after I finished writing the entire book that I realized I needed a title, and Great was part of the title, so I needed something that sort of went with Great. Rusty the Great didn't sound great, but Coop did. And also Coop's original name was Cooper. So there was a way of shortening it to make it Coop. And I wanted something that was longer that could become like a nickname. So it was quite a process to get the name down right.
And we do have time for one more question, if anyone has a question in the audience. Yes.
I just think it's interesting how he got the name or the storyline, the inspiration to write Coop. And I'm not sure that everyone knows how that started.
That was my wife. Okay, so short form of it is we were in Arizona one year and hiking a steep mountain trail that we had done many times, Gateway Trail, just north of Scottsdale a little bit. And it's a dog kind of thing too, because people bring their dogs and do this hike and, away they go. But one day there was a little dachshund sitting there in a colorful sweater. And we looked at it, you snapped a picture, I still have the picture somewhere. And, I thought, well, if this dog's gonna go on this hike, but he's so small, this is a rocky, steep hike, how's he ever gonna do this? So the whole way up, I was thinking about the dog and the challenges the dog would face. And we finally got to the summit, and we had brought a lunch along, and we were sitting there waiting, and we could see the young man who had the dog coming up the trail, but he didn't have the dog with him, it seemed. But as he passed by, the dog was in his backpack, his head sticking out, like he was really enjoying the ride. And that just sort of stewed for a bit. I began thinking about different possibilities, and that's really where the book started. Thanks, Joe.
Perfect, so that brings us to the end of the Q&A. So if our panel have any closing comments or any final words they might like to offer, I'll then go over signing procedure.
I do have one thing. I have read both books and I absolutely love them. And I have a hard time reading sometimes, love them. So I just wanted to say that as a little side.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank everybody again for joining me here to celebrate the release of this book, or watching from somewhere in the netherworld. Really appreciate your support and encouragement.
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to present today and be part of such a distinguished panel on this book.
So thank you all so very much for your attention and for your questions this afternoon. We will be moving along to the signing for this event. So we will ask you, as I mentioned, just to remain in place for one moment, and then we will transport Larry over to a signing table, and I will dramatically announce his arrival as soon as he is ready to receive the folk to get his book signed. There are copies of the book at the signing table. There are also copies of the book at our central cash desk. You can feel free to get a copy of the book signed before you pay for it. Just, again, please do pay for the book at some point before you leave. We're so very grateful to Yellow Dog and Great Plains Press for helping to make this event a reality and for helping to keep Coop's story going. So thank you very much to them. And of course, thank you to our wonderful host, MaryLou Driedger, Darrel Hominuk, Lucy Sloan, Larry Verstraete, and of course, Eva and Barney, the therapy dog. Barney will be around to greet you and say hello as well. So thank you all so very much for being here. Have a wonderful afternoon.